Look, I know you want me to promote this tour, but I desperately need...
Fanatic builds its entire premise around a specific and deliberately engineered vulnerability, and it is worth naming that engineering plainly before any deeper analysis can proceed, because the story establishes from its opening beats that Katrina is isolated by design, exhausted, without her usual security, explicitly warned by someone whose job it is to protect her that this isolation is dangerous. And this warning is not incidental scene setting but a direct signal to the audience that what follows should be read through a lens of risk rather than romantic serendipity, and any critical reading of this film needs to hold on to that initial framing rather than letting the warmth of the subsequent friendship erase it. Kenna's introduction as a grocery delivery worker who insists on personally putting away the groceries, who gradually and deliberately works to win Katrina's trust, describes a specific and recognizable pattern of behavior. The slow, calculated cultivation of access and intimacy with someone who has been identified as vulnerable. And the story's own later reveal that Kenna has been concealing a significant secret confirms retroactively that this trust building was not simply the organic warmth of a new friendship but a deliberate strategy. And this distinction matters enormously because a story interested in authentic queer intimacy would show two women getting to know each other honestly. Whereas this story shows one woman with hidden motives methodically inserting herself into an isolated, exhausted person's life, and conflating those two things does real disservice to the more careful representations of queer connection this analysis has praised in other contexts. It is worth being direct about why this specific setup, a well-known, recognizable person deliberately isolating herself from security because she believes anonymity will keep her safe, only to have a stranger gain calculated access through a seemingly mundane service interaction, mirrors real and well-documented patterns of stalking behavior directed at public figures, patterns in which fans or obsessive admirers exploit small openings, a delivery, a chance encounter, a moment of the target's guard being down, to manufacture proximity and manufactured intimacy that the public figure never would have consented to had she known the full context from the start. And a narrative that romanticizes this exact dynamic, that asks its audience to feel warmth and anticipation as Kenna incrementally wins Katrina's trust, is asking its audience to root for a process that, stripped of its soft framing, describes the early stages of a stalking dynamic succeeding in embedding itself in a vulnerable person's life. This matters specifically within the context of queer representation because it risks reproducing a genuinely damaging idea. The notion that a woman's persistent, secretive pursuit of access to another woman, even when that pursuit involves concealment and calculated manipulation of trust, can be narratively redeemed or even celebrated, as long as it eventually blossoms into affection. And this is a framework that queer audiences in particular should be wary of seeing normalized, because it suggests that boundary violations committed in service of romantic or emotional pursuit are more forgivable when they occur between women, or when they are eventually revealed to be motivated by admiration rather than malice, when in reality the impact on the person whose trust was manipulated does not change based on the ultimate intentions of the person doing the manipulating. Katrina's position within this story deserves particular attention, because she is depicted as a woman whose entire public existence has trained her to be suspicious of unearned intimacy, whose agent's warning reflects a professional reality that people in her position face constant risk from those who develop parasocial attachments and then act on them. And the fact that her guard comes down specifically because she is exhausted, isolated, and starved for the kind of ordinary human connection her fame typically prevents, is not an incidental detail, but the entire mechanism the story relies on to make Kenna's deception work. And this should be read critically, rather than romantically, because it depicts a person's genuine and reasonable exhaustion, her legitimate desire for a break from constant vigilance, being exploited as the exact opening that allows someone with concealed motives to gain access she otherwise would never have granted, and a story that treats this exploitation of Katrina's fatigue and loneliness as the charming beginning of a love story rather than as a violation of the boundaries she had every right to maintain, reflects a troubling narrative logic, one that implies a woman's exhaustion and desire for connection make her fair game for those willing to deceive their way past her defenses. There is also something worth examining in how this premise reflects broader cultural patterns around women's safety and the burden of vigilance, because Katrina's arc, from confidently assuring her agent she will be fine alone, to gradually, unknowingly extending trust to someone concealing a significant secret, mirrors a familiar and troubling narrative pattern in which a woman's independence and self-assurance are subtly framed as the very qualities that leave her exposed, suggesting that her insistence on managing her own safety without oversight was itself a kind of naivety waiting to be corrected corrected by events, and this framing deserves scrutiny because it echoes a broader cultural discomfort with women's autonomy, one that frequently uses narratives of victimization to implicitly argue that women's confidence in their own judgment about their safety is misplaced, rather than centering accountability on those who deliberately exploit that confidence. A more honest and ultimately more valuable version of this material would need to take seriously the real violation embedded in Kenna's methodical, secret concealing pursuit of Katrina's trust, allowing the eventual reveal of her hidden motive to land with the full narrative weight of a boundary violation, rather than as a twist to be quickly resolved or romantically reframed, and would need to give Katrina's eventual response, whatever it turns out to be, the space to include real reckoning with having been deceived, real anger or grief at having her exhaustion and vulnerability exploited, rather than skipping toward a resolution in which the deception is forgiven simply because the story wants its central relationship to succeed. This matters for what it teaches queer audiences about their own instincts too, because stories that ask viewers to root for a deceptive pursuit succeeding, to feel warmth rather than alarm as a secret-keeping stranger incrementally gains unearned intimacy with someone she has targeted, subtly train those same viewers to distrust their own protective instincts in real relationships, to interpret persistent, boundary-crossing pursuit as flattering rather than concerning. And this is a particularly significant risk for queer women, who may already have fewer external structures, family involvement, established courtship norms, social scripts, to help flag concerning behavior early, meaning that internal instinct and the modeling provided by the media they consume carry outsized weight in shaping what they come to accept as normal or even romantic within their own relationship. It is also worth noting that the premise's title itself, Fanatic, signals unambiguously that the story understands Kenna's behavior as obsessive, and this self-awareness makes the apparent decision to romanticize the resulting relationship anyway all the more worth critiquing, because a story that names its own central dynamic as fanaticism, while still asking its audience to find tenderness and connection in that fanaticism's success, is performing the same troubling maneuver identified in other entries in this catalog, offering audiences the frisson of watching a transgressive, secretive pursuit succeed, while still claiming the emotional register of authentic romantic discovery. And this move ultimately shortchanges the genuine dramatic potential buried in the premise, which could instead center Katrina's process of recognizing manipulation, protecting herself, and deciding what if any trust can be rebuilt on honest terms, a story that would affirm rather than undermine the instincts of any audience member, queer or otherwise, who has ever had to learn the difference between someone who wants to know you and someone who wants access to you.